Good afternoon and welcome to Lunchtime Shares with Kevin, where we add value to people's lives, happening every day at 12 on ebusradio.com. For our lunchtime marketing segment, proudly supported by Hollard Insurance, hashtag big ads for small businesses. Joining us is our marketing and communications expert, Craig Page-Lee. Hello, Craig. How are you doing?
Kevin, well. Yeah, good to be on the roll again.
Yeah, good to have you back with us, and I know it's so exciting because we've got some nice things coming up. But Craig, we covered what I found quite interesting and beneficial last week, especially because I did not fully understand the whole differences between first and third-party cookies, nor the fact that third-party cookies are not going to be supported across most browsers on the internet by 2022.
Yeah, Kevin, as you know, the main reason behind this move is to ensure the protection of online users' personal info and to stop that absolute exploitation of personal information by the likes of, believe it or not, advertisers and publishers.
So Craig, before I ask you to share a couple of pointers on what we could take away for our listeners last week, I believe you have a very special guest joining us today.
Yeah, Kevin, we do have a special guest sitting in the wings today. Our guest is a gentleman that I met a few decades ago when I first entered the world of branding and commerce, and definitely someone that I've admired and respected for a long time, primarily because of what he's achieved in the field of branding on the African continent. So today we'd like to welcome Thebe Ikalafeng to the show. Welcome, Thebe.
Welcome, Thebe.
Thank you so much, Kevin. Thank you, Craig. Good to join you guys.
Yeah, fantastic.
So, Thebe, it's customary for Craig just to share some points from in the beginning of today's show about the reminder of last week's conversation. Before we dive right into a conversation with you, Craig, will you share with us some key points from last week?
Yeah, Kevin, it's quite weird for me always. You know, my career is entrenched in this world of communications, advertising, media, branding. But as you know, I'm constantly encouraging our listeners and everybody around me to regularly clear out, cache their online search history and opt out of any form of storing of profiles and login details in their keychain, because this information is exploited by the very people that run the industry that we work with. So let's start quickly by looking at the 4 simple points defining first-party cookies. So first-party cookie is a code that's generated and stored on a website visitor's computer by default when you visit any site. The cookie is often used to track and improve the user experience and is responsible for the likes of remembering login details, basic language, items added to cart in the instance of e-commerce. And all of this done is done really to ensure a more seamless, effective experience in that particular instance. With a first-party cookie, you can learn about what the user did on site, how often they visit the site, what base layer of analytics the marketers then use to develop marketing campaigns targeted back at you around your online behavior. But a key point to remember here is the first-party cookie can't see data related to other sites that you visit on a website. It is only in relation to that particular site that you're entering at that point in time. Yeah. However, looking at third-party cookies, it's a code that's placed on a web visitor's computer after being generated by another website other than your own. And it means that when a web visitor visits your website and a few others, the third-party cookie tracks this information and sends it to the third-party owner who created that cookie, which in all instances is probably an advertiser. So, for instance, if you've got your site, you've got 1 or 2 other links to it, it will be able to track through the first party into the links of that space. However, those links belong to your site. But when your site is open and you're moving into other sites, the third-party enablement in those environments can actually see all of the sites that are open and that you're using. So advertisers or content users can use this rich data to create retargeting lists, which in turn are used to send ads to you or past visitors or users with the same profile. And Kevin, this specifically is the one area where the elimination of the third-party cookie is really going to impact advertisers and publishers.
Fantastic. Thank you, Craig. So guys, if you want to check that out, go and check out last week's series or episode at least on the YouTube channel as well as ebusradio.com. Craig, with that out the way, what are we chatting about today?
Right. So Kevin, the key reason that Thebe has joined us today is because I want to address the topic of branding on the African continent, both from a consumer point of view, but specifically from a nation brand point of view. And there's a lot that's happened on the continent in the last year and a half, and a lot that's happened in our very own country in the last 2 to 3 weeks. And really want to pick up on some of that. And as you heard me mention, Thebe really is the specialist on the continent in this particular field. So Thebe, whilst I've had the opportunity of welcoming you at the beginning of the show, I've not yet formally introduced you to our listeners in the way that you deserve. So please indulge me as I just do that. Okay, so for all our listeners, Thebe Ikalafeng is the founder and principal at the Africa Brand Leadership Academy, ABLA. It's an organization that was founded in 2010 as a vehicle to, quote, sharpen brand leadership skills required to respond to African conditions. A powerful statement and something we'll start unpacking later. To set some context there, the ABLA is an African-focused postgraduate academy for brand leadership whose aim, again, is to, quote, ignite the ability of ambitious individuals and visionary organizations to create the next generation of meaningful brands that have the power to transform Africa and inspire the world. An incredibly powerful statement in that instance. And the ABL will achieve this by inspiring brand leadership that builds Africa's image, identity, and prosperity. And again, that's key to what we're going to chat about today. To quote directly from Thebe's LinkedIn profile, we learned that everything Thebe Ikalafeng does is centered around Africa, having been to every country on the continent, Kevin, and building brands across the continent. And this is the bit that I really appreciate, is summiting the highest freestanding mountain in Africa in the world, Mount Kilimanjaro. And Thebe, I think that you were on the trip when we had the sad incidents with our South African racing driver passing away. Is that correct?
Guguzulu, no, I was there the year before.
Was that the year before?
But I was there also, but on the year that he sadly passed, I passed him midway. So I went for the year before, the big Mandela group, the first biggest one. Then the following year I went for my 50th. So, and I met him as I was coming down, he was going up. So we met.
Okay, yeah. So Thebe lives and believes in the continent's possibilities. He's passionately engaged in inspiring and driving African-focused brand-led agenda, and that positively shapes the continent's images and competitiveness. Thebe has also been recognized by New Africa magazine as one of the 100 most influential Africans. He founded Brand Africa. This is the area that I met Thebe in. An intergenerational movement creates a positive image of Africa, celebrate its diversity, and drive its competitiveness. Brand Africa 100, Africa's best brands, is the only Pan-African research ranking to brands in Africa, and to promote excellence in the building of brands in Africa. The African Brand Leadership Academy is established to power and inspire Africa-focused global brand leadership. And VUMA, the Africa Creative Festival, is a global African initiative to celebrate creative excellence inspired by Africa. Wow, Thebe, so many great achievements, and we've only just scratched the surface, my man.
Sorry.
Welcome, Thebe.
Thank you, Kevin.
Sure, that's quite an interesting CV you have there. The one thing I noticed that from your profile on LinkedIn is that you spent some time working at Colgate Palmolive in New York, and then held in a viable position of Chief Marketing Officer for Nike Africa. Please really share with the listeners how you got into the world of branding and marketing, and why did you choose this as a career?
I'm not sure if I chose it or if it chose me. That's perhaps way to look at it. Because when I left South Africa to go study in the US, I was studying accounting, and I was en route to the US to go finish my accounting degree. Then I met some South Africans who knew me from Wits. And they said, "Oh, what are you doing here?" I said, "Oh, I've got 1 or 2 years left to get my degree in accounting." And the one guy, Spuso Khadebe, looked at me and says, "But dude, you don't look like an accountant." I said, "What do you mean?" He says to me, "You're more like a marketer." So it's like, don't worry about trying to impress people studying accounting. It's not you. You must go do what suits you. It says to me, "You're more like a marketer. So do something like what marketing people do." And literally, but I wasn't really following or listening to him. It was just a big joke because I met him in a club in Ohio, and we ended up. But I ended up in varsity front row accounting first year, last row last year, and front row marketing. So, and I got the American Association Student of the Year for marketing that year when I finished my undergrad. Then I did my MBA straight away because I was a bit older already. I was 24. So I was 25. So let me just do my MBA and get it out of the way. So I did my MBA, and then I made 80 applications for jobs in the US, and only one responded positively, and that was Colgate. I was like, what a bloody waste of 79 stamps. It's when you, I said to myself, I should have known myself better. I should have known them better. Then I should have made just one application, then we'll be done. I would have saved myself money. And licking, because remember those days we had to lick the stamps. I don't know if they still lick them, because now it's just email stuff. I had to lick, imagine my tongue after licking 89 stamps to 80 stamps to send to all those big companies. So that's literally how I started in brand management there, and then I came to South Africa, brand management. I went to Sun International. Then I went to Leo Burnett, PR International was called then. Then I ended up at Nike, and I spent 6 years at Nike as Chief Marketing Officer for the continent, which is when I left. So that's literally how it happened. It was touch and go. Touch and go. It was such an interesting time in South Africa because it was the turning point of South Africa. It was 94, between 94 and 2000, if you will, was probably the most critical time of the country. At least when I went into marketing at that stage, there weren't a lot of black kids at high profile jobs. I mean, there weren't even a lot of people at MBAs at that stage. It's crazy that now MBA is a dime a dozen. But those days, there weren't a lot of people with MBAs. There weren't a lot of people in very high-profile marketing jobs. And I ended up in one. And literally, and I was even to end up at Nike, by the way, it's interesting because my last job, I was dragged there kicking and screaming. Because some Dutch guy calls me and says, hey, when I talk to you about working at Nike, I was in the middle, like 5 p.m., I was like, what, Nike? That's for jocks. Who works at a sports company? and I literally, I said, anyway, I'll come and see you. So I went and saw this guy a day or so later in Kailami. He was Nike just come to South Africa. It was brought in by Ndabantsele and a couple of other guys. They owned, and Standard Bank, they owned 25%. They owned 75% and Nike International owned 25%. At that stage. So I went there and I was still confused as to why they're calling me. I just started, literally, I keep telling people, I became marketing director after working for 2 years. So it was a combination of luck and timing around that time. Because timing, there's a lot of need for talent, luck that they call me, because I then said to them, how on earth, I said to them, why did you call me? I mean, there's so many people you could have called who are experienced. They said, no, we interviewed some lady called Louisa Matthews. I think that was her name. Louisa Matthews. And Louisa Matthews, she was one of the people that started, she was a researcher who worked on the establishment of ETV, as we know it.
Yeah.
And they said to me, we interviewed this lady for marketing, and she says to me, she's the wrong person. She knows the right person, you. So I still wasn't convinced, by the way. They then said to me, why don't we send you to the US? Why don't you take a leave, 1 week leave? We'll send you to the US and go see Nike, go see what we're talking about. Because I didn't understand what they're talking about. They said, go see this brand, go speak to people from Nike. So I went there and I went to Nike International, Auckland. First, I think I stopped by New York. Then I saw Nike Town. Then I went into Portland, which is the headquarters, this massive campus. As you're walking in, it's statues it's buildings named after the greatest athletes that Nike has ever had. There was no Tiger Woods then, because I think Tiger Woods followed a couple of years later in my career. And I met this guy, Nigel Farris. And Nigel Farris was the first employee at Nike. And I met him at the little office. And we just chatted. Remember, there was no agenda. The agenda was just go see Nike, speak to people. We'll set up some people to talk to you, to convince you this is the job you must take. And I saw Nigel Farris. and he was telling me about how the company started, how Phil Knight and Bill Bowman started in the back. So I was really taken up by the passion that he put into the brand, and also just the authenticity of why the brand was started and all that. And then then I met a couple of people. Then I left. I think I saw Phil Knight passing. Never talked to him. I don't know. I think I must have just seen him passing. Said, that's Phil Knight. I was like, okay. So I left, came back to South Africa. And then I came back to South Africa. They said, what do you think? I'm like, when do I sign?
Sure.
That's literally how I ended up at Nike. I mean, yeah, and that at my last job. And by the time I left it, I was heartful because I spent 6 years at Nike. I arrived when it was an entrepreneurial brand. And I left when it was 100% owned by Nike. It was now reduced to spreadsheets and Excel sheets, and PowerPoint presentations. Craig knows. It's Nike Europe wants this, Nike America wants this. Please send a spreadsheet. Please send this Excel spreadsheet. I'm like, flip. I'm the wrong guy for the job. So and that's literally how I ended up in Nike. But I mean, every single job I left, I learned something about myself. And every single job I didn't get, I learned more about myself. And it was quite interesting, whether it's SAB who did not give me a job, and I thought I'd get a job at SAB. And they called me in the afternoon and said to me, geez, you got such energy, you're the guy. You should be getting, they said, you're an amazing guy. We're really excited about getting you on board. They said, but we can't yet. But they says, but there's a small problem we have. So what's the problem? They said, you don't drink. I'm like, it's not a small problem, it's a big problem. Because those days, those days, the guy was smelling alcohol in the middle of the morning. Those days, if you work for a beer company, you have to drink. If you work for a cigarette company, you have to smoke. I guess it makes sense because if you work for a food company, you have to eat, right? But I didn't carry it across the same way. Anyway, that's how I ended up in marketing. I literally ended up in that space. I mean, corporate-wise.
Amazing.
Yeah, what's amazing about that is you probably got to understand the grassroots cultural establishment of what the Nike brand meant, and as brands evolve around the world, whether it's a commercial brand, corporate brand, or even just a branding agency belonging to WPP, as you well know, the spreadsheet takes over eventually, and when you are managing businesses by numbers, particularly in the creative world, it's time to exit. I'm a big fan of that. And you see the evidence of that on all of these big corporate mergers and things like WPP, IPG, Publicis, Dentsu flies into Africa, buys up these countries, and overnight the culture of the organizations change and the people leave the ship like rats, yeah?
Yeah. And I think when I said I learned a lot about me as well, is I then learned that I arrived at Nike when it was an entrepreneurial brand. I left when it was a mature brand. So I knew that I'm the guy to bring in when you're in your entrepreneurial phase.
So that's
I'm
a
not
good
the guy to
learning.
bring in when you are in your mature phase. Because in the mature phase, and I know this because at that time I then was recruited by Coke.
Yes.
And then but everybody else thought I'm perfect. The guy said, people at Coke started talking, we saw Thebe, we think he's coming here, he's going to be the chief marketing officer for Africa. The guys in London, they were excited about me. Atlanta, they're excited about me. Then I had coffee with Doug Jackson in the middle of the morning. He was the chairman of Coke for the continent. And we had coffee with Doug Jackson, and I think he must have asked me a question, what do you think about Coke? I'm like, you're in trouble. I said, you're in trouble, you are boring, you need to change a lot. The way I am, I just said what I said. He asked me for an opinion, I wasn't going to kiss up to him. So I just told him how I felt about life. And then I left. And I didn't get the job. And then I didn't get the job. And then the headhunter in London calls me back and says, sorry, you didn't get the job. He says, but I can tell you what they said. They said, he's the best marketer we've met, but he's a maverick. Coca-Cola, we want people who are going to maintain the status quo, not who are going to disrupt how we do things. So I knew, so that's what I'm saying, I knew I'm not your maintenance guy.
And it is an incredibly safe brand, as you say. That's quite right. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm just jumping in there and picking up from Kevin's question. So now we know how you got into the world of marketing, and then obviously, you understood brand from the back of that. What was that big shift that took you into the space of nation branding? And particularly, how did you get to understand this whole ranking criteria? And the reason I ask this is that it's obviously been a topic that's intrigued me for many years. Doing some postgrad studies as well, I came across Porter's five forces framework, and I often wondered how that could be adapted and adopted into the relevance of nation branding. There's absolutely some distinct parallels between the areas of definition and measurement in Porter's five forces to the unhelped Ipsos Nation Branding Index. Okay, both of them are incredibly complex yet highly relevant components of global brand development. So yeah, please just enlighten us how you went from that point, stepping out of the corporate world, but then actually now creating the center of excellence in one of the most important spaces, nation branding.
So such an important question, because I think as I grew in if you will, in the corporate and as well as the consumer brand space, and I got more adept at that, I then began to learn how all those are quite important in helping to shape the image of a country. So I then began to understand that a lot of the images that we have of the countries, or the characteristics of the country that we know, are based on the brands from the country. So thus, when you think about America's entrepreneurial brand, you think of, well, they've created Microsoft, they created Facebook, they've created Disney. So it's a very entrepreneurial country. And thus, when you think about Germany, you think it's a very engineering-driven country. It's about prestige. You heard me. And then you think about France. You think it's a country of elegance and style and sex. So that realization then said, so then how do we build nation brands? So I began to now understand that the brands that we've been working on are quite critical in helping to shape the image of the countries that of the identity rather of the countries where we are. So and as a result, you then need to understand how then can policy be a key enabler of creating brands of a country, or the private sector. Rather, how can you catalyze the private sector and create policies that create an enabling environment to create those brands, because those brands then will begin to shape the image of the country. That's pretty much how it began, And then obviously, I think my first major one was working in Ghana in politics, because I also then did political branding, so I did some elections, and which is quite interesting that that I was thrust into it, and it's interesting how that happened. Somebody used to work for me, said in the beginning, in the 20s, early 20s, says to me, "You're so good at branding. We are having elections coming up, but we think the best way to run these elections is to bring a branding perspective to them." A branding perspective to them in terms of how you can use the power of brands to shape a campaign. So I ended up doing that space. Now began to, so I actually can use the skills of branding to shape a political campaign. Now remember what happens. Politics are also just as important, because now it's the brand of the leaders. Because now the brand of the leaders are also important in terms of your perception of the country. So you got the products, or the companies and the consumer brands. Now you've got the political brands, because now you say, when you think about Kagame, you're like, okay, so no nonsense, visionary. So that's the type of country that I'm gonna get. So the type of brands which are gonna come here are probably gonna be very disciplined and all those. Are you with me? So
that's absolutely one of the interesting things. Just to interject there, if you don't mind, one of my biggest ambition is always been to write a book on political parties, the brands of political parties on the continent, and you're alluding to that now. Correct. The individual, the ethos and belief sets of the individual, how does that translate into the political party, and what does that represent for the nation as a whole?
Yeah. Correct. And I mean, if you look at even here in South Africa, for example, I think South Africa's economy grew quite greatly post the elections. Why? Because there was a perception of a new South Africa, perception of a very of a good place to do business. Of a promising country, of a safe country, a nurturing country, open country, an embracing country. So that's why then all the businesses flew to South Africa. All the big brands came to South Africa to open that, because the political brand of led by the ANC or Mandela signaled the type of country we can or used to be or still can be or are. It signaled that type of country. And that's why even now, you begin to see now when there's a perception about where's this country brand going. Now the questions are, how do we still keep our companies here? Do we move them to Mauritius? Do we move them to Kenya? Do we move them to Ethiopia? Because the political brand is just as important.
So that's again a really interesting point there, and I'm taking it into a commercial context again now, Thebe. If sometimes the leader of the brand is actually more brand centric and more associated with in a space outside of what the brand represents than what the brand actually means to individuals. So Mandela, for instance, was actually the brand as opposed to the ANC, in that, yes, the ANC was the brand, but the elevation of Mandela as this champion within the brand, there was more traction at that level. Steve Jobs at one point, more traction with Steve than there was at Apple itself, kind of thing. So there is this duality and there is this risk. And it also plays out in organizations when you talk about you're really good at the entrepreneurial stage of a business. There are great individuals who bring organizations to a particular point and they create the brand and they are the brand, but it gets to that tail off of the S. And that individual needs to know when to switch it over and move it on so that the brand value and the brand can continue in its trajectory. So yeah, there is that fine line, knowing what the brand stands for, what it represents, who's representing the brand, and when that individual needs to move away and let the brand be represented by someone else.
And if you look at the brand Italy, for example, I mean, people always complain about the disruption in African governments, how they are constantly electing new people, just changes in parties. But for a long time, Italy had like 10 presidents in 10 years, for many years. But it did not affect the brand Italy.
Yes.
Because the brand Italy, the political brand did not so much affect the nation brand. It was almost like a sideshow. Probably a little bit similar to Israel, where the politics are a sideshow, don't necessarily affect Israel's brand as a country for IT and security. Because if you want IT and cyber security, you go to Italy. You go to Egypt. Because they've defined themselves in terms of that space, other than the other broader definition as the of Jewish nationdom and all those. But in terms of other parts, in terms of technology, security, and cyber. So yes. So that's pretty much how I transition. Because then from there, from now beginning to do elections, I then get asked, but wait, if you understand brands, commercial and consumer, you understand politics, surely you can bring the thinking together to help define how a country can sell itself. In other words, now you need to bring in the third element to it. Because now you've got, first you've got the leadership, right? So you've got the leadership, now you've got the companies, if you will, the companies that are creating brands. Now you need to say, but I need a policy now. So because now you need to create policies that enable companies to thrive, but then also reflect the vision of the leaders for their country, but also which will ensure that the point you made, that the country can continue irrespective of who is in place.
So Thebe, like just listening to you guys, because from my perspective, I I'm not a marketing person. I don't.
Everybody's a marketer, Kevin. What you talk about?
Not to this degree. I'm like, it's so interesting, and how you guys are posing this. Do you think that South Africa has a marketing problem? From how we're selling ourselves and how we're actually doing what we do, not only influencing what the world says about us, but actually how we perceive the country as a whole.
Yeah, I think South Africa has I was speaking to somebody about this the other day, that South Africa has got a couple of challenges now. The big challenge for South Africa is the identity of South Africa. So what does South Africa mean? What does it mean to be South African? I think 1994 was a political shift, but it never ever switched from political to nation building. We've struggled to define the nation. We define the politics, but we never define the nations. So, for example, if you're an American kid, you go to an American school, American high school, varsity, live in America, you already know what it means. The first thing they always tell you, they say, I'm American. And when they say so, you know a few things. You know they're going to talk about freedom of this, freedom of that, because the Constitution and the way of life are very integrated. So the Constitution is so whereas here in South Africa we had a great Constitution, but we never institutionalized the Constitution.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And I think maybe that's probably the problem, that we never quite institutionalized the Constitution of South Africa. We created a book with lots of laws, bills of rights, freedom charters, and all those things, and we launched it and we put it on in the library, and we're like, that's who we are. But we never quite. So Mandela tried to define what by actions what it means to be South African. But South Africa, unfortunately, it takes a long time to build a nation. I think, unfortunately, he did not have enough time to define what it means to be South Africa and being out of politics. Because I think we should have removed nation branding from the politics. But the politics, in many ways, are an enabler of nation branding.
Yeah.
So when Cyril came in, President Ramaphosa came in, and he spoke about Tumamina, send me. He was trying to define a type of leadership, a type of nation that we should be. A nation that can get things done, that understand that we are together, together we can build a country. And they talked about the values of Mandela, which we need to return to those values. But I'm not even sure if we quite define the values of Mandela. I'm in the middle of an initiative now to help define the values of Mandela and what it means to be brand Mandela. What was the brand of Mandela?
Yeah.
And because if we all agree that what he stood for can be a blueprint for the values of South Africa, and then also will inform the vision of who we want to be as a country, the type of country we want to be, then perhaps we can begin the journey towards building the country brand South Africa. So we don't have a marketing problem, because it doesn't matter how much money you spend on marketing. If you're marketing an ill-defined product, you are creating greater risks for the country.
Yeah.
Because somebody says to me the other day, how are we gonna tell the story of South Africa? I said, what is the story of South Africa? I don't know what the story of South Africa is. So you can spend all the millions marketing, coming up with beautiful campaigns and all those things. They are going to come to South Africa. They are going to meet South Africa. The question is, which South Africa are they going to meet?
Yeah, Craig, I think, to one of the points that you and I have chatted about so many times is, unless something is well defined, people make the assumption and assume that that's what the messaging is. But I just want to quickly backtrack. Craig, you referenced Porter's 5 Forces framework and Arnold's Ipsos Nation Brands Index. For our listeners, please can you give us a broad description of this?
Yeah, Kevin, absolutely. Both, as I say, both incredibly intriguing and relevant frameworks. So, Michael Porter is an American academic who's known for his theories on economics, business strategy, and social causes, and he's also author of over 20 books. And here's the key link here. He's credited for creating the Porter's 5 forces analysis, which is a method for analyzing competitiveness of a business. So to quote the Oracle in the Sky, good old Google, we read that Porter's 5 forces framework draws from industrial organization economics to derive 5 forces that determine the competitive intensity and therefore the attractiveness of an industry in terms of its profitability. In parallel to that, Simon Anholt's an independent policy advisor who's worked hard to help develop and implement strategies for enhanced economic, political, and cultural engagement with other countries. To again quote the Oracle in the Sky, we read that these strategies are typically in the areas of national identity and reputation, public diplomacy, cultural policy and cultural relations, regional integration, and a whole lot more. A lot of the stuff that Thebe has actually just alluded to. And Simon Anholt's been called the founder, champion, and instigator of nation brands and place brands terms. And he's the founder of the global annual research study titled Anholt Ipsos Nation Brands Index. So both of these are incredibly interesting areas of specialization, and they definitely address the core principles of positioning, differentiation, reputation management, economic viability, Kevin. And they both at a product and at a national level, all common terms in the world of branding. So yeah, again, competitiveness, reputation, perception, image, investment ability, whether it's brand or nation, transferability of the brand, whether it's a commercial, corporate, or nation brand, all have direct parallel in the intent at the end of the day. But for me, the interesting thing is the only point that really stands out as a differentiator between the two is the aspect of tourism, the pillar of tourism that sits in the Anholt Ipsos Nation Brand Index. But so many of the others just actually have great parallel with the intent. And again, it plays directly into what Thebe was saying. When you look at the ability of the brands that are built in a nation, how do you take those brands and help build the nation brand? And it's quite interesting to see how those two frameworks actually then interplay into each other quite nicely as well.
Yeah. So, I mean, just keeping on the topic of nation branding, Thebe, we know that in 2012, the second year of your Brand Africa Top 10 Most Valuable African Nation Brands report, South Africa was leading the ranking of nation brands on the continent with a brand value of $211 billion, followed by Egypt in the third place, and Nigeria with coming in third place. Some 8 years later, according to Brand Finance Nations Brands 2020, South Africa was dropped well below Nigeria and is now only 3 positions away from dropping out of the 50 global nation brands. Right now, we're going through a crisis, health crisis, slow rollout of COVID vaccines, and economic crisis, and more recently a political crisis, which saw unprecedented looting, rioting, and lawlessness. So what impact does this type of activity have on a nation's brand, Thebe?
The looting and all those things. Well, I mean, so one of the things that the World Economic Forum measures every year in the competitiveness report is measuring whether a place is a good place to do business. So now, if you let's forget the South African companies who may be invested in South Africa. So let's say the VWs who are in Gqeberha and have got all the auto manufacturing this side. Let's say SAB Miller, which is no longer South African. Let's say the Guineas and all those companies. So now the question they may be asking themselves is this a place to do business in? If I face the risk of my goods being looted or my property being destroyed. So that's why South Africa is not among the it's probably among the top 10, but I mean, I think the number one place to do business in the continent, I think it's Mauritius, Rwanda, Botswana. So those are in the top three brands because of stability, predictability. Are you with me? So what happened in the past two weeks ago in South Africa has really had a major hit on brand South Africa, because now the question is it a place where my investment will be safe if I bring in there? Is it a place? And then you add the fact that our labor is expensive. Then you have the disruptions. It's just so I think to me that's a greater thing. So in the Arnold survey that Craig refers to, there's probably three major indices that people always look at in terms of, is it a place I can invest in, a place I can live in, or a place that invests or attract tourists. So from those three, so those are the three probably major ones. So from a tourism perspective, well, we know now we don't have an SAA. We don't have a Mango. Kulula is also on hiatus. So from a tourism, we don't have a problem. How are we going to bring tourists to come to South Africa? From an investment perspective, we've just had the challenges with the looting and all those. So is this a place that I can come and invest in? From a citizenship, which is another where I want to live here in South Africa, it's a great place. Now the question you have is to emigrate, to stay. I mean, there's probably some people asking questions. And I'm not even talking about people who may have ancestral citizenship somewhere else. I'm talking even Black South Africans are having those conversations. And they say, goodness, what is the future for this country? Do I actually move across to Mauritius, next door to Botswana, or go to America or Europe? So you're having those challenges that we are facing as a nation. So we're at a crossroads in South Africa. So I think what we do, out of this crisis is going to determine where we go as a country. Because I mean, we've had too many near misses. The xenophobia attacks, the fees must fall, the Marikana, the protests, the Zuma protests, which we just had now. So it's too many hits on brand South Africa. I don't know how many more this country can take. So that's actually our biggest challenge.
Yeah, it's quite concerning. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. You. Powerful statement. Don't know how many more hits this country can take. You know, that's something the politicians need to step up and answer, because until we know that, there's going to be a hiatus of people not wanting to step in and pick up the momentum again, and that's a really bad place to be for any brand, consumer or nation branding. Yeah. Okay, Tebs, on that point then, you know, so how does a brand grow and position itself in crisis or out of a crisis?
Well, you know, when it comes to during a crisis, the most important thing with the crisis is first you have to acknowledge there's a crisis. So because don't forget, a lot of times during crisis, people actually do not want to acknowledge that there's a problem. So you can see, for example, with South Africa, with South Africa as well, is then the question was, is this an insurrection? Is this a counter-revolutionary? Is this just a temporary thing? Folks, we're in a crisis. So you have to acknowledge there is a crisis, there is a problem. That's the first thing in a crisis, because if you do not acknowledge that one is there, then you are in for a beating. Then I think, to me, the second most important thing is, I think you then have to reflect. Then you have to reflect and say, so exactly what has just happened? And what does it mean? Right? And what does it mean? And then once you've done that, then you have to respond. So how do we respond to this crisis? So to me, that's the you get me? That's the most important part of this thing. And then response is linked very much close to execute. So the response may be the idea. So then you have to execute. on this. And in executing in this, then you have to do another important thing, which is you now need to ask yourself, how do I bring society along? How do I bring my society along? Are you with me, the stakeholders? How do I bring all the stakeholders along on this?
Yeah.
And then finally understand that time is important. So what have I just done? I've given you the acronym for arrest. So that's how you arrest a crisis.
I love it. I think it's a wonderful analogy, and I think it's it's a necessary step to take towards doing any and taking effective change in sort of supporting South Africa as a brand.
Yep. Yeah, and that's a challenge where we are now. The challenge where we are now. I'm not sure whether we've come to terms with what it is that's just happened. You know, and until we come to terms with that, it's not going to. We're not going to get out of this, and that's why the last part of that is time is of the essence. Because
time is absolutely time.
That's what it is. You have to arrest a crisis.
Yeah.
As we close up, wrapping up today's show, don't you want to share with the listeners some takeaways from today's conversation? Because I think this has been so fascinating and such significant points that we can take away from it.
Yeah, I think I'm going to start with a quote from Winston Churchill: "Never let a good crisis go to waste." Yeah, and then really, yeah. So before wrapping up, I just absolutely want to thank Thebe for his time and valued contribution to the show today. And it's not often we have speakers of such great geographic acclaim and expertise on the show, Kevin. So thanks very much for your time and contribution, Thebe.
Thank you so much, Craig. I appreciate this.
Yeah,
thank you so much, Kevin. Really good to meet you.
Yeah.
And you.
Yeah, Kevin, just I think there's only one way to close the show for me, and that is really I've made a couple of notes here in terms of purpose of nation branding and positioning your country in the best possible way in the world system, etc., etc. But the arrest aspect of a crisis: acknowledge, reflect. In your reflection, define the response, which is your idea. And then the execution aspect. How are you going to execute? And then how do you bring your stakeholders and shareholders along on the journey with you? And then obviously ensuring that you've got enough time, that you set the right time frame to enable that change, and that you measure, reevaluate, and set the wheels in motion again. And the arrest aspect of managing yourself through any brand, through any crisis, applies most definitely to corporate, commercial, and nation brands. There's no doubt about that.
It's amazing. And just to add to one of the things that I've learned today is, from a layman's perspective, you kind of listen to experts like yourselves, and you kind of go, I've never considered marketing for political parties. You kind of see Americans do it, and you see how their presidential campaigns run, and you kind of go, yeah, it's those Americans, they do it, and yet it's so important. You speak about brand nation, and you kind of go, wow, like it's actually, it's stuff that is influential, and it influences how we make decisions and how we steer a country, how the country associates to itself, how the identity is created. Like it's a phenomenal conversation. So Thebe, thank you for
absolute pleasure.
Insights. And guys, if you want to go and check him out and go and see all about him, go check it out on LinkedIn. We will have his links in the description box below. Founder and principal of African Brand Leadership Academy, Thebe Ikalafeng. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Craig. Thank you, Kevin. Have a lovely one.
Yeah, thanks so much. Really appreciate it.
Craig, I mean, just in wrapping up, such an interesting man, and so thankful that he could be here to join us. What are we going to be chatting about next week?
I actually want to look at the Brand Africa 100 2021 rankings, Kevin. There's been a lot of movement of brands over the last 3 consecutive years in the rankings, particularly in the top 5 and top 10 positions. And it's quite interesting to see which brands are coming from which nations are really moving across the rankings. And then what are those brands doing in the advertising space and communication space, and what do they mean? So yeah, we get a good mix of an understanding of what brands on the continent are doing next week.
Fantastic. Really looking forward to it. Craig, thank you so much. Guys, if you want to join us, happening every Thursday at 12 on ebizradio.com. And Craig, thank you for today. I think that was a fantastic conversation.
It was fantastic. It really was.